Situation in Congo is a result of imperialism. I would say it's a result of white supremacy, if we're to be really forward. When I say white supremacy, I'm talking about colonization, imperialism, unfair trading, children working in mines, but it's okay for that to happen as long as they're black. It's got overlapping issues in it, but it's also very political. Colonization has played a big role and destabilizing countries. I think what's happening in Congo is almost a mix of...
Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Mr. Money Jar Show. I'm your host, Rotimi Merriman-Johnson. Today we are joined by a very special guest, my future sister-in-law, star of Big Brother 20, and activist and pro-black advocate Trish Balusa. You're going to love this episode, so do stay with us. Trish, a lot of people will recognize you from Big Brother 20 back in 2023. What was your time on Big Brother like?
Well, it was... That's a really interesting question, actually. I guess from the outside perspective, it was iconic. It was needed. It was essential. It was entertaining. Um, from the internal perspective, it was an experience. Um, it was an interesting social experiment. I wish that we got to really discuss the social experiment to its fullness. To some extent, it feels a little bit like it was a waste of time. But I do believe that I have a purpose, and that was part of the purpose, if that makes sense.
Firstly, how do you even get on Big Brother? Is it an application? Did they reach out to you? Like, what prompted you to want to go on reality TV?
You know what's interesting? Other people get reached out to.
Okay.
I actually went for the application. I know there's some rumors out there that I was just picked up. I wish. I know that means you find me really, really entertaining, but no, I went for the application. I applied. And the application process is quite long, actually.
Okay. And when I was doing my research on you, one of your most viewed TikTok videos
Yeah.
is you talking about having Big Brother PTSD.
Yeah.
So what happened there?
Okay, so this is quite interesting. I think there were... allow me to speak openly. There was lots of failures in so many aspects that took place. And I think because of the failures that took place, it was easy for me to be a victim of propaganda and weaponizing council culture. And I guess in my experience, because of how I had handled or how I had experienced the production team, I thought that they care about my well-being. Um, but I think realizing very shortly that actually you can be thrown under the bus so that people have... I guess I don't know if I would say funding. They have other people to please. You become a small issue in a big problem. And I think I pretty much became that, but it was the way it was handled. Because when you're coming from the social experiments, and I think people don't understand this, is being isolated from family and friends for like a good 5 weeks.
Yes.
And then having to come out. First, you have to adjust to the world, but you don't get an opportunity to do that before the propaganda happens, before the scandal happens. And then you don't get the support that's necessary, that's individualized to your characters, in taken in all the intersectionalities of you. It then causes a sense of fear. And then when that fear is perpetuated by the production team or the welfare team, yeah, it messes with your mind a little bit because you're trying to adjust to reality. And then you can kind of question what's real, what isn't real. And when you're asking for information that's essential, being told one thing and then changing, and then I guess just kind of realizing in this whole thing, the social experiment didn't stop inside the house; it carried on outside. And I guess how the social experiment of me, which I would say became a social experiment of how to handle Trish, it took a toll on me because my well-being was not taken into consideration. And eventually I felt like I was losing my mind. I think I've said this before. When I was diagnosed with PTSD, I actually thought I was going to be diagnosed with bipolar because of the way I felt like my mind had flipped and I kind of lost sense of reality. Yeah, and so I experienced extreme anxiety. I didn't eat for like 3 4 days. I was very suicidal. Well, the ITV therapist called it existential crisis. I didn't want to be here. I think it was the first time where I realized, like, wow, I don't want to be here. I'd wake up quite angry that I'm still here. And I think everything coming together and finally sitting down with a psychiatrist and just expressing everything that was in my head, and then getting the diagnosis. It was like, okay, it was a bit of a shock because I think a lot of us, even myself included, relate PTSD to like soldiers and war and stuff. And so I I guess now looking back, I could say it felt like I had gone to psychological war with the housemates in the house and then the production team outside the house. And so there was no sense of protection. And because I was now warring with a team that I trusted, and I guess, trusting them gave them the power to kind of play with my reality and tweak it a little bit. And by the time I realized that, I was kind of like stuck between different realities and trying to find myself and what everything meant with the outside noise.
Okay, so the first thing I'll say is you're definitely protected here. This is a safe space.
Thank you.
If you're comfortable to speak on it, what was the actual scandal that resulted in the PTSD from Big Brother?
Okay, so what happened is that again, I think I'll try and speak of things from the outside world. From the outside world, old tweets came up, or there was search. I would actually call it an attack because at first it was recognized as a sense attack. I think it was intentional propaganda and attack to ruin or to justify why I deserved the microaggression and the racism I faced inside. And again, I guess this is quite political. I think sometimes when we see a Black person doing well in a certain area where we feel like it shouldn't be a Black person doing well, I think people go out the way to find a reason to ruin that. And when they see you doing well because you are suffering, and you may potentially get a reward for that, there has to be a justification for why you're deserving of that treatment as a Black person. And I think all those came together and old tweets had come up. But what was weird now is the fact that that was part of the vetting. It was meant to be part of the vetting
Mm.
because this is known. A lot of people on the reality TV will tell you that. What the audience don't know is part of the vetting is that actually we're going to take your social media to protect you from anything coming back to you as people's perspective change, as you know, the world changes, the way we interact changes. All of these things are quite known as a reason to why it is part of the vetting for your welfare. And that was not done properly because when it was done at the time, they said everything's fine, blah, blah, blah. I remember thinking, oh, okay, because I was on Twitter when the world was quite mad and I had my own to say and I gave it back to people the same way they gave it back to me. Everybody was there, knows what it was like. It was like a jungle out there and Congolese people got it. I had to put it out there. But I also gave back because I'm like, no, you're not going to talk slick and I'm not going to say anything. But then to be like, okay, maybe I deleted those things then. Maybe just so far removed and moved on from it. But then it came up at a time where I was a conversation. I was the victim of racism on TV, on reality TV and microaggression, where I think a lot of people were quite uncomfortable to see how Black women are treated, Black women like me. And I think that conversation was a bit too heavy for ITV to take on and carry through. And I don't think they were equipped or had the people in the production team who are knowledgeable enough to know what to do with this conversation. So I think when he then flipped aside, instead of discussing it to its true extent, like, why is this tweet scandal? How did this happen? Is this who this person is? And should they be judged based on that or who we've seen? It almost became easy to be like, you know what? This gives us an opportunity to not talk about it all. Let's move on from it. And and then the consequences of that or the actions of that meant that I had to be treated a certain way. I had to be kind of thrown under the bus.
Hmm.
So it was things like telling me I couldn't come to the I think okay, two examples. Telling me, oh no, these things didn't happen in the house, so we can't punish you for it. And also, we've seen who you are, Trish. We know who you are, blah, blah, blah. And people have responded really well to your apology. So you're going to be fine. And then on the other side, it's like, well, we can't invite you to the rap party. But if you go and say that you can't come, that would be great. You know, the same way you said, you know, you're going to give people time to forgive you. If you could just go and say you're going to give housemates time to forgive you, I'm like, whoa, they were literally racist towards me. Why am I needing forgiveness from them? You realize things have kind of flipped. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to say that because that's not my choice. I want to come to the right party. I was a topic of conversation for a lot of the weeks. I deserve to be here. Do you know what I mean? But it's a sense of, well, no, we can't really afford security for you. Again, that could be something that's quite light if you're saying it to somebody else. But if you're imagining coming out of a social experiment for 5 weeks, where it's a show where people either really love you or really hate you, and you experience a lot of resentment inside the house. So you're conscious or you already think that you're quite disliked. And now you got a producer telling you that they can't afford security for you. it puts in your head, am I in danger in a
Mm.
public? Like, what happens if I go out now where I don't have security, I can't afford security? What happens then? And it's those little things that kind of build up and then create a certain image. I think for them, it was easy to say certain things to keep me calm, but not taking into consideration how this actually contributes of to where I was at the moment and how that plays a part in how I also reflect.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean?
So you didn't feel protected as a Black woman by the production
I
team
was
for
not
Big Brother.
protected. I was not protected. I think when it came to a conversation between having a hard conversation or just kind of like get rid of her, I was like, get rid of her.
Hmm.
And I think what's quite sad is they wouldn't even realize at what cost. They don't care. I think it's an afterthought because they are not in my world, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
I think you can tell it's clear that Black people with a diversity type of mindset are not at the top.
Hmm.
They may have Black people there, but it's kind of like the Kemis and maybe brown people like the Sunak, the Pretty, the Brave Man. I think Black people only really thrive in high spaces when they have a conservative mindset. When they're quite diverse, they don't quite make into those spaces where it actually makes a difference to people like us.
I completely agree with you. I spoke on this with a guest on the previous episode of the podcast, and um, I think in many ways, the progress of Black people is seen as antithetical to the progress of
Mm,
white people or to other ethnic groups.
yeah.
And some of that is hidden in our language.
Mm,
You have Black, then you
yeah.
have white.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Black isn't a country,
Yeah.
white isn't a skin color,
Yeah.
but like they're opposites of each other.
Mm,
And so, to your point, it's like if you're going to succeed, it does seem like if Kemi Badenoch had more of a pro-Black stance,
yeah.
and if she was advocating for her Nigerianness and
Yeah.
her Blackness and
Yeah.
her background, she maybe wouldn't have become the head of the Conservative Party.
Absolutely
Yeah.
not. Look at Diane Abbott. Look how long she's been in politics. And look how many times she almost didn't make it to be mother of the house. And she has a very pro-Black. She has an inclusive mindset.
Hmm.
And this is what happens when you are a person of color, a Black person or brown person, and you're quite inclusive. It's almost weaponized and used against you. You don't get to progress because between Kemi and Diane Abbott, you see who the media has demonized quite often.
Mm.
I think again, this is quite funny. I'm speaking about this because these are some of the things that people didn't get to see. Even what happened to me and the channel completely throwing me under the bus, all those things were very much linked by racial hierarchies. It was never conversation of, oh, your tweets are inappropriate or they've offended everybody. It was who it affects the most. Because there were some tweets of mine that was completely inappropriate, but behind closed doors, that was not that was not the tweets that was being spoken at about. Behind closed doors, it was more like, oh yeah, a lot of them are old, it doesn't matter, we're not gonna punish you. But Trish, what was that tweet you said, you asking for the difference between anti-Semitism and racism, asking who can experience what?
Mm.
Like that was disgusting. You're like, no, that's actually not disgusting. That's a real question. And actually that's following on from what happened to Diane Abbott and when she was suspended for writing that letter and pointing out the racial hierarchy. Why is she being punished for telling the truth? Those are just facts. You can always see who a Black person is from a mile away, but you cannot always tell someone is Jewish. So that would mean that Black people are more likely to experience discrimination because it's very obvious. But it's like, but no, it doesn't matter that you can express that. Is somebody is offended, somebody who actually matters, their offense matters. A Black person's offense does not matter. And so there's almost a punishment for Diane Abbott, despite speaking the truth, because who is offended is on a higher
Hmm.
hierarchy. Again, this
Hmm.
is where racism comes in. There's a thing that I said yesterday, I'm starting to say now. I say that racism and Zionism are unidentical twins. And we're seeing that now when it comes to cancel culture. Do you know what I mean? And so just to kind of see how that took place, when I was being asked questions about my tweets supporting Diane Abbott and saying that actually this is true, I knew straight away this is bad for me because I've been thrown over here. And I also understood coming out the house that whilst we're in the house, we missed a lot of the October stuff that happened, October 7th, I think. So completely politically unaware, but understanding that everyone else has now got to pick a position that will benefit them. And so that was kind of like, it became a conversation in the background. And so I was like, okay, you guys don't care about anything else. You want to kind of run with the anti-Semitism thing, and that's where you're going to try and go with. It didn't matter that actually some of my tweets were actually more offensive towards Asian people. Because like I said, we used to go in,
Mm.
but this is where you're going to try and stick at. It almost became like a political target. And me actually saying, yeah, no, I support Diane Abbott, she's right, blah, 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 to people who are clearly like, no, that's almost something that plays against me, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. And so there was things that were contributing to that aspect of things, and it became more about, okay, who is it going to benefit if I offend? If there's a punishment for me offending, do you understand? Like it becomes a case of catering to who the fundings are, who the donors are, who the lobbyists are, who's in the production team up there, and their identity. It becomes
Power,
about personal identity
and power.
and power.
Yeah, who
Yeah.
has the most power?
So basically, money and
Where
power.
yeah, where I've identified a shift in this is actually with regards to Black women. I would say that 10 years, certainly 20 years ago, but 10 years ago, people could get away with a lot of disrespect towards Black women
Mhm,
in the public sphere.
mhm,
And um, what I've noticed in literally like the last even couple of years is
mhm,
that Black women have come together
mm,
and said like enough's enough.
yeah,
And I think the Ginger J comments were maybe like the straw that broke the camel's back. And then we've seen how he was reprimanded and the consequences of his comments there.
yeah,
I think now Black women have actually become incredibly powerful. And you can't just make comments about a Black woman's hair or
yeah,
like skin tone or whatever, comments that would have been commonplace, like
yeah,
when I was at secondary school or even at uni. So yeah, I do agree with you. It seems to be that whoever's in power,
yeah. I have
that's who gets
I,
regarded the most.
I have to add, I think Black women are more empowered. I don't know if we are incredibly powerful, especially in terms of like the UK media.
Hmm.
I think there's still a big gap when it comes to the issues Black women face. But I think we have been pushing, which is what I really appreciate. And I think even with me, I feel a lot of Black women's voices saved me, or uh, Black women kind of speaking up about the microaggression I was facing in the
Hmm.
house
Hmm.
and saying, no, we know that because that happens to us. We're going to put in a complaint. We're going to take action now. Whereas before we were almost used to our hatred being normalized. Like, oh, okay, this always happens. Now we're like, actually, no, we're actually going to complain about this. We don't know how far that will go. And it's not as powerful as other groups when they complain, when they are offended, but it'll still get somewhere. Like I know with mine, I think the type of power that we have at the moment, it's more like when a society feels pushed to have to do something. It's not because they recognize actually Black women deserve better. Like I said, with my case, it was a sense of first my family were kind of talking to the production team, showing concern, we're worried she's going about this. But it was a sense of no, she's fine. It's okay. Unless she mentions it, it's fine. And then you get the Ofcom complaint where they get like 1,000 complaint of microaggression, or the racism me and Nokia are facing. Then it's like, okay, we may have to do something. But you see, it's a sense of, oh, okay, we'll try to ignore it. And then it's a sense of like me then speaking about it, and then they can't deny it because the public have complained,
Hmm.
my family have complained. Now I'm saying the same thing without being in contact with the family.
Hmm.
They have to do something. Do you know what I
Hmm.
mean? Because it's leaving that reference point. So when we create the reference point, things are done for us because
Hmm.
we're now empowered.
Hmm.
But if that had not taken place, nothing would have been done. And then what then was forcefully done is I think they had a late in life where they had Black women there discussing issues of the way Black women are treated and whatnot. I don't necessarily think it was done for me, but I think it was done to sort of say, see, we're ITV and we're taking care of
Hmm.
this.
Hmm.
We're doing something.
Hmm.
And, this is what it looks like. But it's like, okay, if you're going to do something in the long run, how do you then make sure the two Black women in the house that faced discrimination against other people don't face it from the production team, which essentially end up happening? So it's like, are we really powerful if we can still experience racism or discrimination from the people at the top? Or or are we just empowered to have to push people to make some sort of action?
Yeah,
If
you're.
Black women didn't push back on the Ginger J, what would have happened? We would have just been like, oh yeah, yeah, come on, you know how they are.
Hmm.
But if you say that about certain communities, do you know what I mean? If you come and say that about white men, if you say that about Jewish people, you don't need Jewish people to send complaints all over for that to happen, you just know it's wrong, and rightly so when it is discrimination. But I guess that's what power is, when you don't always have to constantly fight to prove that you're worthy of being defended, or you don't have to go through discrimination.
You grew up in the UK, but you were born in Congo.
Yeah.
What was it like being born in Congo and then immigrating here?
It's interesting. Yeah. Well, I guess I did grow up in the UK. I was gonna say I grew up in Congo as well. But I feel like I came here when I was 9.5, and the 9 years I lived in Congo, I think they were really crucial in shaping me. I think they shaped a lot of me, and they shaped my passion for wanting better for everyone, inclusivity. But also I remember when my dad was around, it was decent, because I would say we were well off from what I knew being a child. And dad was in the army, he was a captain, he was doing well. When my dad had to migrate, politically, a lot of things changed for us, because at the time, he was technically a political refugee. At the time, we had Mobutu, who was our very own dictator, placed there by the West, or supported by the West. Um, and he kind of had a problem with certain people who were rebelling against him or speaking up against him. And I think at that time, my dad was one of the people, one of the, I don't want to say founders, but one of the first few people to support the political party that's in power at the moment. But back then, Mobutu saw anyone as opposition, or even encouraging opposition, as a threat, and they needed to either go to prison or die. So when he realized that, oh, my dad was one of them, I think he was actually meant to be judged on TV. I think he was the third person. They had a list. He was the third person, so he really had to get out of the country quick. So things dramatically changed for us in terms of finance, and then my mum followed with my sister, who's your fiance. And then it was me and my brother left for a couple of years. I think my dad left when I was 3 or 4, and I joined them when I was 9.5. But for that 5 years, I really saw what it's like to have no guardian or parent, or what it's like to see other people be loved by their parents and see the difference. And I did have moments where I really appreciated life, because sometimes the poorer you are, the more grateful you are about little
Of
things.
course.
So there was moments where I would just be happy that we're eating rice today. Like, that would just be like such a luxury. But as I grew older and I'm healing the child inside of me, I realized how much those moments were quite traumatizing as well. But they did shape me quite a bit. I think my values and my love for music, and and I guess sometimes my humor is very much grounded in the Congolese in me, and my dancing and stuff, and my quirkiness. I think the gays called it, what did they call it? Call it being now.
Okay.
So like,
We swear on the show.
oh, sorry. Oh, well, there we go. Sorry. First person to break the rule. But it was a sense of, like, I got a huge LGBT fan from my time in Big Brother. And they were like, we just love the way you dance, the way you do this, to do that. I'm like, oh, I'm just being Congolese. But they're like, oh, that's so cunty. I'm like, oh, okay. I see a commonality here. I'm like, oh, yeah, that was just me being Congolese. That was me just doing my thing. But yeah, I think it shaped me quite a lot, positively and negatively. And yeah, I guess I'm still discovering how they've shaped me. But I think, yeah, the multiculturalness is interesting. Identifying as a Congolese, and to some extent British.
How do you feel about what's happening in Congo at the moment?
Always devastating. But it's so tiring as well, being devastated all the time, because as some people are discovering it now, some of us have first lived the impact of what's happening, and then we've constantly campaigned, constantly advocated, talked. I was arrested in 2011 for protesting about one of the electoral frauds that took place in Congo. I was arrested in the UK, of course. I spent 23 hours in a cell. I know prison is not for me. I was like, okay. Now I really appreciate what those activists that was spending time in prison were going through, because I'm doing this for 23 hours and I don't know if I could do this, you know.
What
But
did they arrest you for?
You know what? I think they called it, what did they call it? Freight. It was, you know, when they use big words to just say you're disturbing the peace or something like that. At the time, I didn't understand. I was like, okay, whatever it is, you're not going to find anything because I haven't done anything. We were kind of like just protesting and causing a disturbance. And I just want to say this, protests are not meant to be a convenient. That's the whole point of it. They're meant to inconvenience people so that people stop and think, what is going on here? And I want my sense of peace. And then to find that sense of peace, they also have to kind of negotiate about the people who are protesting because they clearly are lacking peace. So we were protesting, we were singing, chanting, dancing. We went to the Apple store, we went to Downing Street, and then we were making our way to the Congolese embassy. When some of us were kind of cornered, I think kind of had police and horses around us. They did it so slyly though. I had to give it to them. I thought they were just stopping the protest, and next thing, there's a bunch of us getting arrested. And then they did say some words, but I was like, "Oh, okay, whatever." And I thought they're gonna take me to a police station. Then they'll let me go. Next thing I know, we're going all the way to Barking. I'm like, "Can you guys take me to a police station nearer to my house, please?" Barking is kind of far. I gotta go to work tomorrow. Yeah, and then yeah, the rest was history.
For people who may not be educated on it, how would you describe the situation in Congo at the moment?
The situation in Congo is a result of imperialism. I guess it's a result of a lot of I would say it's a result of white supremacy, if we're to be really forward. It's also, when I say white supremacy, I'm talking about colonization, imperialism, unfair trading, um, children working in mines, but it's okay for that to happen as long as they're black. It's got overlapping issues in it, but it's also very political, and it's definitely, colonization has played a big role and destabilizing countries. Yeah, it's very political. I think what's happening in Congo is almost a mix of things that are happening in different parts of the world. I would say it's a mix of what's happening in Gaza, Palestine. It's a mix of what's happening in I can't think of one particular country. It's also capitalism, and yeah, so there's essential colonial and capitalism in it. So, and it's always been the same routine: destabilizing underdeveloped countries or third world countries for resources, so that the West are living a specific
Yeah.
life.
And at the moment, it's
Yeah,
cobalt.
yeah,
So somewhere in the region of 70% of the world's cobalt deposits are in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
yeah,
And that cobalt is in all of our phones, all of our laptops,
mm,
all of our electric vehicles. It needs to
yeah,
be mined out of the ground.
yeah,
And it's done often by children without any safety equipment. And then that is then bought, processed in, I believe, Asia, and then sold to largely US multinationals so that we
yeah,
can all have nice gadgets.
yeah. And it's interesting that, because it's interesting how capitalism works and everyone plays their part in it. Like, for example, you acknowledge that these things, the minerals and materials are picked up from Congo, but then kind of gone over to Asia and then sold to developed countries, as you would say. Everybody plays a part, because it makes you wonder, how much do the people in Asia actually get from what's sold here eventually as well? Do you know what I mean? And so I find it quite interesting how racism and capitalism are all interconnected, especially with colonization as well. And I guess part of destabilizing it, it's done for Colonial, is making sure there's a certain leader in place who isn't going to pay attention to this, who isn't going to ask for maybe Africans' resources to benefit Africa, because if they do, then they're advertised a certain way.
Or if you have a pro African, pro black leader in place, then they're killed.
That's it. And you know what's so interesting? Because I know you wanted to talk about cancel culture. I was going to say, I think council culture has always existed. I think the word is new, but it's always existed, and it's always used differently depending on the time or the political climate at the time. Because I think part of cancel culture, if we look at cancel culture in the 60s, it actually means death or long prison sentences for black leaders or revolutionaries, and it isn't really, the word wasn't cancel culture. It's called something else, either, oh, they're terrorists, or they were going to do this. And terrorism is also a sense of cancel culture that we're seeing now. But yeah, but it's interesting to see that council culture shifts depending on um, the era and the political climate. and who it's affecting. But I think at the top of council culture, there is a lot of racism and Zionism there. And we also see that from a lot of Black or African revolutionaries who are very anti-imperialism. They speak about Zionism also being an issue. I know we don't talk about a lot as Black people, but we don't often take in how the connection between Palestine and Congo. But a lot of revolutionary Black leaders have always spoken about it. You would see that. I know a lot of people try to give the impression that this starts in October, but actually, if you go back to Malcolm X's speeches in the 60s, he speaks about it. If you go back to Thomas Sankara in the 80s, he speaks about it. And so you're like, okay, this has always been quite common. Propaganda has always been a thing that's weaponized. And I think council culture is technically propaganda. But when you say council culture, it makes it sound less dangerous. But when you say propaganda, that's when we understand the extent of it. And I think council culture is just propaganda. And at the moment, it's just weaponized.
Yeah. Capitalism and racism do go hand in hand, in my opinion, because capitalism is a doctrine that was created in Britain in the late 1700s by the economist Adam Smith. And there were, very many positive things that he put forward in his work. His book was called Wealth of Nations. But one of the central assumptions within capitalism was, the wealth is for us and not for the savages.
There we go.
Not for the savage nations.
Yeah.
And that that resources can be privately owned. And if you can own resources, then you're entitled to the money that those resources can produce. So if you can draw a line on a map and say, we own this piece of land, then you can make the money from that was cobalt today, but 100 years ago when cars were taking off, it was rubber.
Yeah.
In the exact same part of the world, in the Congo.
And this is quite interesting because you talking about drawing a line on a map. It brings me to the Scramble for Africa meeting, or what's it called? The Berlin Conference.
Berlin Conference, yeah.
Sometimes also known as the Congo conference, is where a bunch of European leaders, white leaders, got together to decide how to split Africa and how to manage it.
And if you look at the map, it's like straight lines, right? It doesn't even follow a river or a mountain range or anything.
There was not a single Black or African person in that room to have an input, but they had already decided how they're going to share it, and how it's going to be navigated. And it wasn't for the savages, I guess, the people actually living in there. And we see it now, how that's played out through the miming as we speak. Talk about Congo. Congo is very wealthy, but Congolese people are poor. That's a reflection of capitalism, is that somebody has decided that actually what's in Congo belongs to people who are not so savage, people who decide who should run Congo. Do you know what I mean? And you see how colonization now plays a part in capitalism, because despite colonization finishing, which is a pretense that we get, it's still going on. And anyone who speaks against it, they face the council culture. They face the propaganda. And so then we have the Patrice Lumumba, people who didn't even get a chance. But because they dared to speak, it's now, well, your punishment is the council culture of what it was like back then.
Assassination.
Assassination. Do you know what I mean? And whether it's assassination directly or assassination through propaganda, for demonizing you to your own people, it's going to happen one way or another.
So let me know if you think that this is a reach. But this is what it sounds like you're describing happened to you on reality TV.
Right? Okay. Victimization.
The same thing.
Absolutely. Okay. Oh, that's what. Yeah, that's.
It's all interlinked. Okay.
Yeah, everything is all interlinked, and this is what I was trying to say. And I think the thing I did most wrong in regards to the Big Brother case is to think there was going to be no backlash for me calling out racism. I think that's where I lost myself. I think I thought I was British for a minute. I was like, oh, I can speak my mind. Like, this is a free country. I have rights, just like everybody else. And it was to speak about racism as a matter of fact, and not put it as questions, because British people love to do that. Is Britain racist? Are we tolerant? I don't do that. And I think doing that is very un-British like. And I think it reminds British people that she's not one of us
Hmm.
because she's coming to speak about these really uncomfortable things and just doing it so forwardly. And on top of that, she's using that voice so freely when she is not white.
So this is a great segue into one of the things I love about you is how vocal and opinionated you are. And I think that this is as a result of your neurodivergence as well, a topic we've spoken about
Mm,
a lot off camera. Um, Online,
mhm,
you speak about having ADHD.
mhm.
When did you first find out that you had ADHD?
I was diagnosed with ADHD this year, actually. It was in
This year.
May. Yeah, it was May. So I was almost 35. But I think I've always known that I had it. I had something. I knew I had something. I knew I was always a bit different. But yeah, I think later, maybe in the late 20s, I started to get more of an idea that is ADHD. I was diagnosed with dyslexia at 18, though. And funny enough, I did ask for help in secondary school before doing my GCSEs. But they kind of just ignored it, told me that they just think it was English because it took me a long time to learn English as well. So they just thought it was just an English weakness. And then that made me sway towards practical studying because I thought it made me doubt my academic abilities, if that makes sense. So I end up going to performing arts college, and then once a lot of paperwork started coming up, I started panicking again. I asked for help, and I told them I was struggling, and again they made me do an English test. That's quite questionable. And they told me I'm fine. But then I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna have to keep going into the creative route because I seem to be exceeding there. And it doesn't require much of me academically. That's how I thought about it at the time. And so I end up going to uni to study performing arts. But when I went to that uni, I found out that the performing arts course was 20% writing, no, 80% writing, 20% practical. I was like, I'm not doing anything here. This is my worst nightmare. I'm struggling. And that's when I got to sit down with a psychologist and yeah, and I was diagnosed with dyslexia at the time. And I thought that dyslexia was in a way I kind of looked at dyslexia like it's ADHD. I was like, oh, this explains all my behavior. But then I think later on I realized that it's kind of limited to reading, writing, and whatnot. And also it's more of a what's the word, commodity, when it's an addition to something or when it's an add-on. I don't know if commodity is the right word, but dyslexia is almost it could almost be seen as a symptom.
Comorbidity.
Comorbidity. It's almost seen as a symptom of something. It's a result of something else. So then I was quite intrigued. Like, okay, I do seem quite rebellious. I'm very passionate. Everyone tends to demonize my passion or misreads me, like, or doesn't understand why I feel so strongly about this. So yeah, I looking more into ADHD and yeah, yeah.
How do you marry being a vocal, opinionated, neurodivergent woman with some of the traditional expectations of women within African culture? You're an eldest child as well.
Yeah, oh Lord. Yeah, that's whoop my ass. I'm not allowed to swear. Sorry. No, you know what? I don't mix them together. I think on my experience, and I think you can ask my mom this. I have absolutely failed in terms of the tradition and expectations that's expected from me as a woman. I think there's certain characteristics that's demanded of you that I just don't have that. I'm not submissive. I think it's weird people talking to me about submission. Like, leave me alone, don't be a creep. I don't follow those rules. Excuse me, I speak back. Some things that are seen as being disrespectful, I challenge things. If it doesn't make sense to me, I think sometimes as neurodivergent, we're misunderstood when we're trying to get clarification. If you're a child, but you're trying to get clarification from an adult, it's seen as you questioning authority or
Oh,
challenging
it's
things.
rude.
But you're like, I'm just trying to understand how this rule makes sense. Do you know what I mean? And so yeah, it was really difficult for the two, and this is why I don't like gender roles or expectations because I think it puts people in a box that they don't necessarily belong in, and I think that could be quite traumatizing for someone who's a neurodivergent but doesn't quite know it yet because it tells you that whatever you are, you need to get rid of that because it's completely unacceptable and you need to tap into this. But I'm not able to just kind of like do that.
For people who think that they might be neurodivergent, but they haven't had a diagnosis yet, what things, feelings, like kind of show up What kind of things or feelings showed up for you that made you suspect that you're
Okay.
different?
Okay. From my perspective, there's a sense of understanding that you're brilliant, but not quite tapping into the necessary, not understanding you're brilliant, but not feeling like the world accommodates to that, to aid that brilliantness come out of you, or understanding that you're great, but your greatness shouldn't come from you. It almost feels like that a little bit as well. Or or people do this thing where this is one of the reasons you'll know you're neurodivergent, is people will criticize a skill or a character of yours behind closed doors, but then when they see the public appreciate it, they almost act like they've always approved of it. Because I think being neurodivergent is because we're so honest and because we genuinely try to cater to society, it's easy to get public approval than it is to get like internal approval,
Hmm.
because internally people need you to make things convenient for them. The public don't need that. They need to find you relatable. They need to find that you say things that they're thinking. And as a neurodivergent, it's so easy for people to be like, oh my God, yeah, why hasn't there been anyone like that? I got that a lot from my fans. Like, I've never seen someone like that on Big Brother. Just say what we're thinking. Just speak openly. I think someone even tweeted saying Trish is talking about microaggression and Black women's experiences on white media. Oh my God. So that was strange, and other people probably understood the rules, and I think I mentioned that I forgot that I was Black. I was like, I have the right to be here, I am equal to you, and that's how it plays in not following the rules. And sometimes you find out when you're a rule breaker, the public will appreciate that, because also they are rule breakers, because they are neurodivergent and undiagnosed like you, so they relate. But indoors, there's a sense of backlash, because it's, why did you break the rules? If you had only listened, you're embarrassing me. Do you understand? It's very different. So it's very much, they're both very intense end of the spectrum. And sometimes you can feel quite conflicted. You really would question if you're supposed to exist as you are, or if you are, or if it's time to just wear the mask like everybody else. I think you can cause an identity crisis when you're undiagnosed, but I would say anyone who's experiencing that, to lean more towards the part where they feel comfortable in themselves. Having to decenter people is really important.
So this is a phrase I've also seen you use online, which is
Okay.
decentering men. I think I've heard this phrase for the first time in 2025.
Mm, I've been
What do
saying
you,
it for a while. Where have you been?
what do you what do you mean by decentering men, and why is it important to do that?
I think in a patriarchy world, patriarchy is a system where men are basically in charge and tell everybody else what to do. Um, in a patriarchy system, and where women are trying to thrive freely, I think it's so important to challenge the status quo. I think in all aspects of me, it's important to challenge any status quo. And when I say that, I say it's not just, maybe I've spoken more about decentering men, but it's about decentering certain things that causes a hierarchy. And I think in patriarchy is men that kind of benefit from the hierarchy and perpetuate it. Women do too, but they don't benefit from it. Do you understand? So you have to decenter men because there's the benefiters. The same way I would say decenter your parents, decenter religion, decenter your God. It's things that stops you from questioning how things can improve. And when I say decenter men specifically for women, and I guess for gay men as well, is to decenter having to find validation for men. Is to decenter thinking, okay, I have to be a good wife, or I'm going to spend the rest of my life training how to be a good wife because one day a man's gonna marry me. Like, I've got a whole life to live. How am I living it in case one day a man wants to marry me? What about me? What do I enjoy? What if I don't want to get married? What if that association isn't something that I do really well at? So I say that to say that people have to live a life that fulfills them as individuals before catering to men, because a lot of women don't do that. And a lot of lives and joy has been lost because women just centered men. Yeah. So decenter men.
Mm. You are a mum too,
Hmm.
and you also speak online about raising a neurodivergent son. So how have you navigated motherhood and raising a son who's also neurodivergent?
I'm still navigating. I'm still learning. I think also just accepting that everyone's winging it. We're all winging it. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna come in and tell you, oh, this is how I do it. listen, there's some days where this is how I do it works. There's other days I'm like, what am I doing? Because this guy has gone into a new stage of learning, and all the skills I have is from the last stage of where we saw eye to eye. Now he's like 7 and he's learning other stuff. He's learning how to manipulate, and I don't quite know how to navigate this, with how literal he is. And I find it quite interesting as well, him being autistic and me being ADHD. He's so like, what's good for him is a sense of routine, repetition, consistency. What works for me is organized chaos, it's flexibility, it's spontaneity, if that's even a word, being spontaneous. And so sometimes I'm like, having to do what helps him is not stimulating for me, but it's working for him. And that could be quite a challenge. But also, I have to say, I think because of my ADHD, he finds me really entertaining. Like, we're able to have fun. Sometimes we tap into that and we're mad together, and that helps tire him out and ground him as well. There's times where it's like it actually works, this ADHD mom, autistic child, but sometimes it could be a clash, because sometimes I feel overstimulated and I don't want anything, but then he's having a meltdown and he can only feel soothed by maybe hugging. Whereas I'm like, nobody touched me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So having to constantly go against myself and my needs, but it makes me realize how much there are probably a lot of moms in our community that were neurodivergent as well, and were either overstimulated or felt like they were going against themselves and reacted with power that is in the community, and then the kids end up being quite traumatized and recovering from that from undiagnosed parents as well. I
Yeah.
think that's something that plays a big part in how we've parented and been parenting. Because sometimes I'm like, I really understand why my mum was having a bad day that day. Like, I just need a time to myself. But then I am me with a sense of knowledge of I need to regulate myself.
Mhm.
This is me needing regulation, whereas the other generation didn't. Do you know what I mean? And so it's given me education in terms of parenting. It's made me wanting to break generational curses more effective, because I'm knowledgeable on what my weaknesses look like and how they can impact my child.
Mhm.
So I think, yeah, it's a great way of breaking generational curses, because I know a lot of people think of generational curses of like voodoo and stuff and supernatural stuff. But as someone who's kind of studied psychology or CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, it's a sense of putting in the same actions and getting the same result, but being angry at the result, but continuing with the same actions because it's culture.
Mhm.
Do you know what I mean? I think breaking generational curses really requires us to go in and change how we do things so we can get a different result as well.
Yeah, which is why you're so big on questioning things.
Yeah.
This next question I have for you is if you're comfortable to speak on it.
Mhm,
So, according to the NHS,
mhm,
1 in 8 pregnancies will result in miscarriage.
mhm.
You've spoken about your experience of miscarriage, so I wondered what you thought about that statistic.
1 in 8 pregnancies will result in miscarriage.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know what I think about this statistics. I know that miscarriage it's a really sad experience to have to go through. I think maybe we need to start talking about stats like this as well as part of the sex education. Obviously depending on age. But I think some of us are shocked by miscarriage because we don't talk about it, and when it happens, it seems like something just personally happened to us. Not that is 1 in 8 pregnancies. I know it may sound kind of sick, but hearing that is a bit comforting to me, because it's like, oh, it's not an isolated incident, but also then taking that and saying, how is this happening? What does need to get changed? Who are the people that are experiencing miscarriage the most? And at what point do they miscarriage? You start to put in initiatives and resources to then research and try to put in preventive things in place rather than intervention. So yeah, I've spoken quite clearly about my miscarriage. And I have to say, for me, I found the light at the end of the tunnel by realizing that the guy who would have been the dad is such a dickhead. So for me, that's made me like, it's giving me a sense of closure. But I know that with some women, it's happened with people who they love and they're still with them. So their journey would look very differently to me. But at the time that it happened, it was the most devastating thing. I think it was the saddest thing I've experienced. Like, I was so sad for myself that I didn't know how to express that I am really sad at how sad I feel. There was, it was hard. I think it's the first time I experienced madness.
Mm.
I think every time you go for something quite traumatizing, you lose your mind a little bit. And I think that was my first time being conscious that I'm losing my mind. That was how harsh that was. And because of that, I think it needs to be more of a conversation of normalizing the topic to women, so it's not so foreign, so it's not so isolated, so it's not a taboo. Because wanting to speak about it after that, I found that a lot of people, it made others feel uncomfortable, and then it made me feel shame about my grief. Whereas now we're having more conversations, we're talking about it, we're also talking about how then this affects Black women when they go on to have children, because again, the disparity is a lot in between the experiences that Black women face and other women of color. I spoke at the Mother Group conference in 2023
Mm.
about this, and I know that a doctor came to speak to me afterwards. She really liked what I had to say, and we spoke, and it was really good. But I didn't know until then, because I said to her that I never want to have kids again, because for me, I don't know if this is too much, but I was diagnosed with incompetent cervix. So I was always told that having kids would be quite tricky for me, to the point where in the pregnancy with Sankara, I had to get surgery to stitch up my cervix during the time I was pregnant. And then I had to get surgery to take it out as well, which are both risky and could cause you to go into labor and have a miscarriage again. And so I thought, I never want to have pregnancy, if that's what pregnancy looks like. But I had to find out from a doctor that actually you can plan way in advance so that you don't have to go through all that. And she looked at me and said, "Didn't they tell you that?" I'm like, "No." And I'm like, I feel like if I was a white woman, I would have been given comforting information to know that this doesn't always have to be what pregnancy looks like for me. But instead, even with Sankara, when I was pregnant with Sankara, I had to almost kind of force their hand to check my cervix, because what they initially said to me was, "Oh, you're gonna have to have 3 miscarriages before we can start checking your cervix for your pregnancies." I said that's a lie, because first of all, I've lost twins, so that means I've already had 2 miscarriages, and I'm not going to wait to have another one. My next pregnancy, I am going to get my cervix checked. And so I really put my foot down on that. But to realize that something that can only happen to women who look like me, again, is quite sad, because I could have gone and had another miscarriage. I would have never known that there's preventive things to put in place whilst planning for the baby if I didn't do the conference years later, where I already decided I don't want to do this anymore. And so you just see like how the outcome plays out in the little details and the little discrimination that takes place.
Mm.
So yeah, I again, in terms of the miscarriage and whatnot and healthcare, I think the disparities is something that the bridge definitely needs to close, and that's something that I'm working on as well. I've done a couple of stuff on that overall. I do a lot of advocacy, so
Yeah, no, that's firstly, thank you for sharing that with us. And then that segues into like my penultimate question. So I've got 2 more questions for you, and
okay.
it's yeah, I feel like you've lived 1,000 lives, and that there's so much
Lived so much.
more
I feel
to,
like I've definitely had like at least 2, 3 past lives though.
yeah.
This is my last one. I'm not coming back as a human again.
Yeah, yeah.
No. Yeah.
Well, if you could come back as something, what would you come back as?
Can I say lip gloss?
Yeah,
No, okay, maybe a branch, a tree
a tree.
branch.
I
Yeah.
knew you were gonna say tree.
Yeah.
I don't know
I
why.
feel like trees are cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they've nailed it. They're just
Yeah. 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 And finding out that trees talk to people as well,
yes.
I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's great." Yeah.
They do emit a frequency.
Yeah. Oh, a seasoning.
Yeah.
Food seasoning.
Okay.
Like adding season flavor to
Okay.
stuff. That's
Okay.
very much my brand.
I do feel like you're seasoning in human form. So
Oh,
in this
thank you.
current form that you're in.
Okay.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so my penultimate question was gonna be, um, yes, you've lived 1,000 lives, you've been involved in a lot of things,
Hmm.
but what does the future hold for you? We were kind of speaking downstairs about how, like, your previous counsel for that situation and a project you're working on. So could you perhaps speak to that?
Okay. So okay. This is what I'm going to tell you what I want to do and what I'm doing. I want to go into investigative journalism.
Okay.
I'm already doing facilitating workshops and stuff like that, and advocacy. That's very much who I am. Is very clear. I'm not going into I don't want to go into politics. Everyone's encouraging me, but I don't like the way British media treats Black politicians here who are progressive. But yeah, what I'm doing at the moment is I'm sort of liaising with different people in different sectors to just tackle disparities, bring in equity, because I know that a lot of organizations, or even this country, we talk about we want to treat everyone equally, and we hear the word equality, but we don't actually see the things that are put into place to make sure that equality is the goal, that is actually the outcome is happening, rather than just a point of conversation that we're going to, but we never quite land and there's nothing put into place. So there's something in there that equity needs to actually come into place. And I believe equity is people like us who have experienced the discrimination, who have experienced the gap, who can speak of it from experience, to come in and say, actually, this is what it really looks like. And I want to use my voice for this and put initiatives in place as well. Because I know that a lot of people knew my advocacy from Big Brother, but I haven't started there. I've been advocating for a long time, been campaigning for a long time. I'm knowledgeable on, like I said, progressiveness, therapy, and stuff like that. And so social
You'd make a
issues.
great therapist.
I would thank you, thank you.
You've therapized me. People don't know, but we've had some conversations. You've really helped me.
Oh, thank you. Oh, did you hear that?
Yeah.
I was basically everyone's therapist on Big Brother as
Mm,
well.
mm,
Um, but yeah, just kind of like advocating and influencing policies so that it closes the disparities between Black people and all the other race. And I'm doing that in different sector, whether it's housing, which I'm doing as well, whether it's reality TV, which has been really interesting as well. I am doing, and policy making. A lot of people are looking into welfare for reality TV stars now. That's a thing as well. And I've worked with researchers behind closed doors. So it's trying to influence things in policies where it actually matters, rather than speaking to the people who are doing it, because they don't care. They love that derail, deny, and whatever stuff that they do. So yeah, and even within women's rights, I'm a big feminist. So just yeah, advocating and influencing policies behind closed doors in a way where I'm doing keynote speaking, where I'm going into documentary, where I'm using my skills and connections
mhm.
and people with influence to come in and actually change things in different sectors. But all in all, basically just closing the gap
Yeah.
in
That
different ways.
that theme comes across really clearly in the conversation we've had today. That
Oh, does it?
whether it be in entertainment,
Yeah.
healthcare, parenting, motherhood,
Okay, great.
you want to close the gap and
Yeah.
build equity for us.
Yeah.
So I completely love that. This last question
Yeah.
goes to all guests. Do take a beat if you want to think about it. But what does black wealth mean to you?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, it's got different meaning, hasn't it? I don't know if we've got it just yet, or I would say the black wealth that we've got at the moment is our joy, despite everything, is a sense of resilience. But I really hate encouraging resilience. But I would like for black wealth to have to mean both health and actual financial abilities, or not have to worry financially. That would be great, because even I find it quite hard when you tap into the conversations of finance. I'm like, oh, I just finished fighting for racism and women's rights, and now you talk about finance. Like, I don't know how to tell. I can't do everything. But it would be great for Black people to have health and to have finance and not have to pick between one or the other. Because sometimes it often feels like chasing finance can be detrimental to your health, depending on your sector. But I would like to not have to compromise either and live comfortably. But also, I think taking into mind, what is it that Thomas Sankara said, is better to have water for everybody than to have champagne for a few.
Mm.
And I think there's a question in there of how some Black people climb the wealth sector, and what's detrimental there. Okay.
Um, well, you've done, you've spoken, you've opened your ISA for yourself.
Oh yeah,
You've opened a junior ISA
yes I did.
for Sankara.
Sankara, yeah.
So you've taken some big steps there in terms of the finance, and once you set it up, then it's done.
Thanks to you, but you simplified it for me. Do you know what I mean? When you're speaking, I'm like, okay, cool. This sounds simple. This sounds very simple. I think also maybe Black people really struggle because financially we are intentionally being kept behind. We are being deprived of resources financially as well. And sometimes that can seem like a hard battle if you are trying to be progressive. Because I do believe, especially after getting an insight in the British media, I think as a Black person, you to some extent have to choose whether to be Black or to be wealthy. And that's very tricky. And that's why you commonly see as Black people get wealthier in the industry, they become quite conservative.
Mm.
And so, yeah, that could be quite a struggle as well, because there's people who want to get the money, but if there are systems and obstacles in the systems that prevents them from being able to get the money and acknowledge um, Black people's struggle, then they have to pick one or the other. And that could be quite tricky. So the capitalism in there, the capitalism system is a tricky one. And I think Black people systematically are impacted the most by it.
I think that's one to speak about on a later episode. But for now, Trish Balusa, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.